I bought this house because I wanted to disappear. Not in the dramatic, on the run kind of way, but in the quiet, I don't want to be found way. The house sat on the outskirts of Forgotten Town, surrounded by thick trees that creaked with age and a silence so heavy it made your ears ring. It was cheap, suspiciously cheap, but I didn't care. After everything I'd been through, I wasn't looking for charm or curb appeal. I was looking for solitude. It's a one-story farmhouse built in the early 1900s, with sagging floors, peeling wallpaper, and windows that moan when the wind pushes against them. The air inside always smells faintly of rain-drenched wood and something older, something like forgotten paperbacks left too long in the sun. I moved in with nothing but a mattress, some clothes, and an old coffee pot. I thought this place would be my quiet salvation. I was wrong. The first night, something felt off. The wind outside was brutal, howling through the dense tree line, and the house groaned like it was protesting every gust. I made a small fire in the brick hearth and curled up on the floor with a blanket, staring at the embers until my eyelids grew heavy. I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes again, the fire was nearly out and the wind had stopped. That's when I heard it, a soft scratching sound. Subtle at first, so faint I imagined it, but then it came again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I sat up slowly, the blanket sliding off my shoulders. The sound was coming from the floor. No, not just the floor, the space directly beneath me. I froze, straining my ears. The pattern was strange. It wasn't frantic like mice or erratic like raccoons. It was slow, methodical, long drags, followed by short taps. Almost like fingernails, not claws. I tried to rationalize it. Animals. I whispered, has to be animals. Maybe something had found its way into the crawl space under the house. That would explain it, right? Still, I couldn't ignore how deliberate it sounded. I reached out and knocked on the wooden floor. Just once. The scratching stopped. Immediately. The silence that followed wasn't comforting. It was suffocating. Thick, like the walls were holding their breath. I stared at the floor, hand still hovering over the wood. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I waited for it to start again, but it didn't. Not that night. I barely slept, heart pounding under the weight of silence. When the sun rose, I told myself I'd overreacted. Old houses make noises. They creak, they settle. Maybe I was just not used to being alone in a place so quiet. The next night, it returned. This time at 2:30 a.m. exactly. I checked the clock when the scratching woke me. I was in bed, lights off, eyes adjusting to the darkness when it began again. Scratch, scratch. Only now it wasn't beneath the fireplace. It was. Beneath my bedroom, beneath me. I didn't knock back this time. I just lay there, clutching the blanket to my chest, listening. The scratching continued for nearly 20 minutes before stopping on its own. And when it did, it didn't fade. It just ceased mid-drag. Like it realized I was listening. The following morning, I forced myself to check the crawl space. I popped open the square hatch outside and slipped inside with a flashlight. The space was tight, filled with cobwebs, broken insulation, and the stench of wood. I scanned every inch, crawling on hands and knees, but I found nothing. No animals, no tracks, no tracks, just dirt and shadows. That unsettled me more than anything. That night, the sound came back. Same time. 2:30 a.m. only this time. It was louder. I was still awake, waiting, as if some part of me knew it would come again. The scratching started in the hallway beneath the floorboards. Then it shifted, moving slowly, crawling. I could hear the direction of it. Scratch, scratch, pause. Then again, closer. Scratch, scratch, pause. It was tracing the edge of my room like it knew exactly where I was. I sat up in bed, my breath caught in my throat. And then, without thinking, I knocked again. 3 times. 1, 2, 3. The scratching stopped. A long pause. Then knock, knock, knock from beneath the floor. I felt every hair on my body rise. It wasn't possible. It wasn't just a noise anymore. It was answering me. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. The knocks had come from directly beneath me, spaced perfectly apart. Not the shifting of wood or echoes from old plumbing. They were intentional. That night, I slept with the lights on. I didn't tell anyone. Who would I even tell? The neighbors. There weren't any friends. I'd left them behind. I convinced myself that maybe I was imagining it. Sleep deprivation, stress, nerves from being alone. But deep down, I knew. Something was under the floor, and it knew I was here. I didn't want to go back under the house. After that night, after those three knocks came from directly beneath me, I tried everything I could to rationalize it. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe the wood creaked in response to temperature changes, but there was no mistaking it. Those knocks were perfectly spaced, perfectly timed, mimicking mine. I spent the entire morning pacing the living room, jumping. At every sound the old house made, the floorboards groaned under my feet, but it was different than the knocking. The knocking had intent. This house, whatever it was made of, was holding something beneath it. I could feel it like a weight pressing up from under the floor. By noon, I'd talked myself into going back down. I grabbed a utility light, a thicker flashlight, and a screwdriver to pry open the side hatch. The crawl space ran the entire length of the house, about 3 feet high at most. It was dry but smelled like rotting leaves and copper. I pulled a scarf over my mouth and slid in on my stomach. The moment I was inside, it felt wrong. It was darker than it should have been, even with the beam from my light cutting through. The dust, the shadows seemed too thick. The silence under there was suffocating, like the world above had been muted completely. No birds, no breeze, just my own breath and the faint scrape of my clothes against the dirt. I moved slowly, scanning the underside of the floor. Cobwebs clung to the beams, some so old they crumbled as I passed through them. A few loose boards. A torn piece of insulation here and there. Nothing that explained what I'd been hearing. Then I found the scratch marks. They were faint, but unmistakable long, thin lines etched into the bottom of floorboards. Not clustered like animal claws. Not in a mess of patterns. These were organized, parallel, repeated, human. I reached up and ran my gloved finger over one. The wood was splintered at the edges, like something had dug in with pressure. I followed the marks along the beam, crawling further into the house. That's when I saw it. A small bundle tucked near one of the support posts. At first, I thought it was trash, just some insulation wadded up into a lump. But when I leaned closer, the flashlight beam caught something odd. Fabric. It was a child's shirt. Old, faded, torn nearly in half. And next to it dirt that looked recently disturbed, like someone had tried to dig, then stopped, or had been buried and moved. My blood ran cold. I scrambled out of the crawl space faster than I should have, bashing my knee against the edge of the hatch in the process. But I didn't care. I needed to breathe. I needed to be out from under there. The second I was back in daylight, I slammed. The hatch shut and sat against the house, gasping. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the hallway with a baseball bat in my hands and every light in the house turned on. I kept my phone close, even though I knew I wouldn't call anyone. What would I even say? There's something scratching under my floor, and it knocks when I do. No one would believe me. Hell, I barely believed me. At exactly 2:13 a.m., it started again. Scratch, scratch. I clenched the bat tighter. It was moving under me slow, careful, like it knew I was listening. I didn't knock this time. I didn't want to. I stayed still, heart hammering in my chest as the sound crept beneath the hall. Then, without warning, it stopped. Silence. I waited. Nothing. And then I heard it. A whisper. So faint. I thought it was the wind at first, but it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from beneath me. A child's voice, whimpering, cold. The word came softly, dragged out like breath on glass. I dropped the bat, my whole body locked up. I stared down at the floor, not breathing. The voice came again. Let me out. I stood up and backed into the far wall, my hands trembling. The house creaked as if in response. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice, then back to steady. I didn't move until sunrise. By morning, everything was silent again. No whispers, no scratching, just the usual creaks of the house stretching in the light, but I wasn't okay. I knew what I'd heard. And worse, I was starting to think that whatever was under the floor wasn't just a thing. It was someone, or it used to be, and now it wanted out. I didn't leave the house the next day. I didn't even go outside. I just sat in the kitchen, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, eyes fixed on the floor. Every creak made my skin crawl. Every tick of the old wall clock felt too loud, like time itself was stretching thin inside this place. But worse than the sounds were the silences, the heavy ones, the kind where you can almost hear something breathing just out of sight. I kept replaying the voice in my head, cold ... Let me out. I hadn't hallucinated it. I wasn't asleep. I was fully conscious, fully aware, and it came from directly beneath me. A whisper, yes, but unmistakably human and young. A child's voice. I couldn't shake the image of that tiny shirt I'd found under the house, torn, buried, left there like someone wanted to forget it ever existed. The idea of calling the police crept into my mind, but I didn't act on it. I knew how that conversation would go. What could I say? That my floor was talking to me. That something buried under my house knew my knock pattern. I'd be laughed, off the line, or worse, locked up. By nightfall, I'd moved a mattress into the living room. I couldn't stand sleeping in the bedroom anymore, not after those knocks and whispers. I positioned myself near the fireplace, away from where the scratching usually came from, and kept the lights on like I had the night before. I didn't expect to sleep. I was right. The house held its breath again at exactly 2:30 a.m., and then it started. Scratch. Scratch. But this time, there was something else. A sound like movement, like someone or something was shifting beneath the house. The dirt below my floor groaned. Boards flexed softly. I could hear weight now, presence. It was no longer pacing aimlessly. It was searching, dragging itself beneath the floor, closer to where I was lying. And then the knocking. Free slow. Hard thuds. Knock, 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 directly beneath my spine. I jolted upright, heart slamming against my ribs. I didn't knock back. I didn't speak. I just sat there, frozen, staring at the wood like I expected it to peel back and reveal something underneath. Then I heard the voice again. You hear me now? It was clearer this time. Stronger. It carried weight, like it wasn't being whispered anymore, it was being spoken. No childlike weakness in it. No pain, just awareness. And intent. My throat dried up instantly. Then came scratching, rapid and agitated. Back and forth, clawing frantically, then the voice again. Why won't you answer me? I ran. I didn't grab anything. Just bolted for the front door in my slippers and flung it open into the cold night. The air outside was freezing, but I didn't care. I stood in the middle of the yard under the moonlight, watching my house like it had turned into something I didn't recognize. Nothing moved. No lights flickered. The house looked like any other old, abandoned place on the edge of nowhere. But I knew better now. I stayed out there until the sun rose. When I finally stepped back inside, the house was silent again. Still, peaceful, even. The kind of fake peace that makes you feel more uneasy than comforted. I locked the door behind me and dragged a heavy bookcase in front of it. Whatever this was, it wasn't just some haunting. It wasn't a creaky house. It was something intelligent. And it wanted my attention. I decided to do some research. Not online, that would have turned up a bunch of useless ghost blogs and crackpot theories. I drove 30 minutes into town and visited the local library. It was one of those dim, dusty buildings that smelled like mildew and forgotten memories. The kind of place where secrets like to hide. I asked the librarian about the house. She was old, maybe in her 70s, with sharp eyes and a voice that sounded like paper tearing. Old farmhouse out on Hollow Creek Road. She asked, peering over her glasses, "Why would you buy that place?" I hesitated. The price was right. She frowned, then stood up and disappeared into the archives. 10 minutes later, she came back with a newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle. Missing child, 1993. Mason Birch, age 6. Last seen near Hollow Creek Road. Search suspended after 3 weeks. My stomach turned cold. That house used to belong to the Birch family, she said. Awful story. The boy went missing, just vanished. Parents claimed he wandered into the woods. Search dogs never found a trail. It was like he was swallowed whole. I swallowed hard. Did they ever find... I stopped, not wanting to finish the sentence. She shook her head. No body. No leads. No closure? When I got back to the house, I couldn't bring myself to go inside right away. I sat in the car, staring at it through the windshield. I knew the name now. Mason. The voice under the floor wasn't just a ghost. It was a boy who never left. I didn't go inside for hours after reading that article. I sat in the car with the engine off, the weight of Mason Birch's name pressing down on me like a physical force, a missing child, a forgotten case, a shallow article buried in the archives of a town that clearly wanted to forget. But someone hadn't forgotten. Someone or something was still down there. Eventually, as the sky darkened and the woods around the property turned to shadow, I forced myself out of the car. The cold air bit at my skin, and every creak of the old farmhouse seemed amplified, more aware of me than ever. I stepped inside, expecting something to change, something to be waiting. But the house remained still. That was somehow worse. The silence now felt like it was watching me. I didn't bother unpacking. I didn't eat. I just grabbed the crowbar from the tool closet and stood in the center of the hallway, the place where the knocking had echoed the loudest. I knew what I was about to do was insane, but I also knew I had to do it. If Mason Birch was down there, I had to know. The floor protested as I pried it open. Nails screeched as old wood split apart, splinters flying as I dug through plank after plank. Beneath the boards, there was the crawl space again, dark, tight, and waiting. But there was something else now. Something that hadn't been there before. A smell. Not musty or moldy like before. This was different, metallic, foul. Like old copper, soaked in decay. I gagged and pulled my shirt over my nose. Then I dropped down into the crawl space again, flashlight in hand. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The air was colder than it had any right to be, and it wasn't just the outside temperature. This was a different kind of cold. A deep cold. I crawled back toward the spot where I'd found the shirt. The ground was uneven, the dirt packed in like someone had filled it recently. I started digging with the crowbar, scraping through dry soil and crushed insulation. The earth here was wrong. It shifted too easily, like it had already been disturbed. Then I hit something. Not wood, not rock. Fabric. I froze. I brushed away the loose dirt with shaking hands, revealing what looked like a small, decomposed bundle. It was wrapped in what remained of a child's hoodie, stained and half-rotted. Beneath it, bones. Small, fragile, human. I dropped the flashlight. My stomach lurched, and I stumbled back, hitting my head against one of the low beams. Pain burst across my scalp, but I barely registered it. I crawled out of the crawl space in a blind panic, dragging myself onto the hallway floor, breathing in ragged gasps. I found him. I didn't want to admit it, not even to myself, but I had just found the body of Mason Birch buried beneath my home. And I knew I couldn't leave him down there. I called the police that time. They came, swarmed the place with caution tape and ground-penetrating radar. The coroner confirmed what I already knew. The remains were decades old, a child. Likely male, no visible trauma to the bones. Trying to take in everything else. I told them I'd found the shirt during cleaning. The smell led me to dig. I didn't mention the scratching. I didn't say a word about the knocking or the voice. They took everything and left me alone by dawn. One officer gave me a look before he drove off, like he didn't quite believe me, but couldn't prove I was lying. They said they'd be in touch once they identified the remains, but I already knew the answer. The house was quiet after that. deathly quiet. No scratching, no whispers, no knocks. I should have been relieved, but the silence felt final. Like a door had been closed, but something had stayed inside. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the hallway again and again, waiting for the clock to hit 2:13 a.m. Nothing happened. No sound, no voice. I sat in the living room staring at the space where the floor had been ripped open and resealed by the cleanup crew. They'd left the patch uneven, and the wood didn't match. It was a scar now, a wound. And then, just as I was about to head to bed, I heard it knock. One soft thump from beneath the floorboards, then nothing. I knelt then, heart thudding. Mason? I whispered. Silence. And then, so faint, I thought I imagined it, came the smallest voice. Thank you. I didn't cry when I heard Mason's voice. I thought I would. I expected a wave of sadness or relief. But instead, I just sat there on the floor, staring at the patched boards, numb. The soft thank you echoed in my skull like it came from inside my own bones, and then nothing. No more whispers. No scratching. No cold. It was over. So, I thought. The next few days were quiet, peaceful even. I stopped hearing things. The lights didn't flicker anymore. The oppressive weight in the walls lifted like someone had taken a hand off my chest. I slept through the night for the first time in weeks. The house, for all its age and decay, started to feel like a real home. But peace doesn't last in places like this. On the fifth day after Mason's remains were recovered, something changed again. It was subtle at first. The house began to smell different, not rot or mold, but something sharp, acrid, like ozone and burnt hair. The kind of scent you catch during a lightning storm or when you rub two metal wires together. I searched every inch of the place, thinking maybe an outlet had fried or some wiring was exposed, but there was nothing. And then at 2:30 a.m., the silence ended, but it wasn't scratching this time. It was dragging, a deep, heavy scraping sound, like something large and wet being pulled across concrete. It came from under the hallway, slow and deliberate, echoing beneath the floor like whatever was down there didn't care if I heard it anymore. I froze in my bed. Mason? I whispered into the dark, terrified. But the voice that answered wasn't his. It was deep, guttural. Wrong. He's not here anymore. I sat up, drenched in sweat. The voice came from beneath the floorboards, closer than ever. And it wasn't whispering. It was speaking clear and steady in a tone that sounded almost amused. You helped him, it continued. But you forgot about me? I backed up until I hit the headboard. Who are you? I asked. Silence. Then, scratching. Fast. Violent. Like claws ripping through wood. And then the voice again. Quieter now, as if it were speaking directly into my ear. I was here first. I didn't sleep after that. The next day, I tore up more of the floor. I didn't tell myself I was being paranoid. I knew now that something else had been buried beneath this house, something older, something deeper than just the remains of a lost boy. I opened the crawl space again, dragging in a full work light, rope, and a hand shovel. I wasn't just going to look this time. I was going to dig. I was going to find out what had been hiding beneath my feet since the day I moved in. The further back I went into the space, the more unnatural it felt. The dirt was dry and powdery at first, but then it shifted, became sticky, black, wet. It clung to my gloves like tar. The walls of the crawl space seemed tighter, almost as if they were pressing inward. My breath echoed strangely. My light began to flicker. Then I saw it. An old wooden hatch, half buried beneath a pile of broken insulation and twisted roots. I dug around it, yanking it loose, and found a rusted iron handle attached to a trapdoor barely 3 feet wide. It hadn't been part of the original house. The boards were different, older, and underneath it, I could feel cold air rising like breath from lungs long dead. I didn't want to open it. Every part of me screamed to get out, to leave it buried. But I pulled the hatch anyway. It groaned open with the sound of wet wood tearing. Inside there was a staircase stone, descending into darkness. Unlit, unnatural. The air that came up was freezing, but it didn't feel like air. I felt like presence. Like something ancient had been waiting down there for a long time, patient and still. I didn't go down that night. I closed the hatch and backed out of the crawl space, heart pounding in my ears, hands shaking uncontrollably. I sealed the access door with nails, then pushed the heaviest furniture I owned in front of it, but I knew it wouldn't matter. That night, the voice returned. You let him go, it said, almost admiring. But I stayed. I always stay. Then the walls began to shake. The pictures on my shelves rattled. A hairline crack split the ceiling. And the lights went out every bulb in the house all at once, with a sound like glass being to a vacuum. In the dark, I heard it crawling, not under the floor, inside the walls. The walls were alive, not figuratively, not in some poetic ghost story kind of way. I mean, literally something was inside them, crawling, shifting, breathing. I stood in the center of the living room, frozen in the dark, flashlight trembling in my hand. The light flickered erratically, barely enough to pierce the blackness. All around me, the sound of scratching fast, frantic moved inside the walls, like 100 fingers clawing for release. The voice came again. You brought me back. I spun toward the kitchen as a loud thump hit the drywall behind the cabinets. Then again, a slow, deliberate knock, just like mine. Just like the first time. It was mimicking me, always had been. But it was never Mason. Mason had been trapped, buried. This thing, it had been waiting. When I found Mason, when I dug him out, I broke something, unsealed something. Maybe it had been dormant, sleeping, feeding on the sorrow, the silence. But once I opened the floor, once I let that little boy go, it woke up, and now it was loose. I backed into the hallway, moving slowly, light trembling in my grip. The photos on the wall shook. A mirror cracked down the center with a high-pitched creak. I passed the access hatch and stopped. The furniture I'd stacked against it was pushed aside. The nails I'd driven in, gone, clean, no splinters, no signs of force. It hadn't come through the hatch. It had always been inside. I ran into the bedroom and slammed the door shut. I locked it, then shoved a dresser against it. Not that it would do any good. You can't bar out a house that's infected. I turned on every light, every lamp, even the closet bulb. The walls pulsed with distant knocks, then silence. I held my breath. From under the bed came the quietest whisper. You shouldn't have knocked. I dropped the flashlight. My legs nearly gave out. I grabbed the lamp from the dresser and turned to the bed, ready to lift the frame and run, scream, do something. But there was nothing there. No voice, no shadow. Just the faint smell of burning wood and old blood. And then I saw the knocks. On the wall opposite the bed, 3 small indentations in the plaster. Fresh, clean, perfectly spaced. Not from the inside. From the other side. The thing in the walls had reached through. I backed into the corner, grabbing my phone with trembling fingers. I didn't call the police. What would I even say? Instead, I texted my sister. Just one line. If anything happens to me, don't come here. Burn the house. Then I opened the Notes app. I figured if I died, someone needed to know what really happened. I started typing out everything. The scratching. The knocking. Mason. The voice. But before I could finish, the lights in the bedroom flared, then burst one after another. The room plunged into darkness, and then I saw it. Not with my eyes, exactly, but with my mind. It stood at the foot of the bed, not entirely in the room, but bleeding through a mass of twisted limbs, pale and long, hunched like a spider with a human torso. Its face was smooth, eyeless, but its mouth gone. The mouth stretched across, where its face should have been, open wide and pulsing with slow, wheezing breath. You open the floor, it rasped. And I opened the rest. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears, but the voice was inside my head now. Deeper than sound, deeper than thought. It whispered things. Memories I didn't have. Screams I'd never heard. Names I'd never spoken. It was showing me. I saw flashes of old rituals, symbols carved beneath the house. I saw Mason not lost, but given a sacrifice. His family hadn't failed to find him. They'd put him there, fed the thing, sealed it in, locked it under the wood in silence and time. And I had undone it. My breath caught in my throat as the walls began to pulse, black sludge leaking from the corners, warping the boards. It was breaking through. I had to act. I crawled across the floor, grabbed the crowbar I'd left leaning near the closet, and ran for the living room. The hatch, the one in the crawl space, I knew where it was now. I could seal it. Trap it again. Maybe. I ripped up the patched boards, yanked open the crawl hatch, and dropped inside. The cold hit like a wave. I crawled fast, flashlight beam shaking wildly, until I reached the buried hatch. It was open, just a crack, but it was enough. The darkness beneath it swirled like a living mist. I raised the crowbar and slammed the hatch shut. Then I nailed it. Over and over, screaming, crying, barely breathing, the moment the last nail went in. The house fell still, dead still. The air grew warm. The pressure lifted. The lights upstairs flickered back on. And just like that, it was quiet, not the heavy kind of quiet, the real kind. I sealed the floor again. I didn't leave the house for 2 days. But nothing happened. No voices, no knocks, just silence. That was 6 months ago. I sold the house to a developer. Told them it was unstable, dangerous. They bulldozed it last week. I watched from the woods. They didn't find anything in the crawl space, and for the first time in a long time, I feel free. But sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I think about that voice, about the thing in the dark, and I wonder, if I hadn't knocked first, would it have ever answered? The house had been sitting empty for decades when it fell into my hands. Inherited from a distant relative I'd never met. It reeked of mildew and dust. Its walls yellowed with age. Still, it had charm, and I hoped it might hold hidden treasures. Worth salvaging? On the first night, after the movers had left and silence settled over the creaking old structure, I found myself drawn to the attic, a place I had avoided during the day. Armed with a flashlight and curiosity, I climbed the rickety stairs. Each step groaned under my weight, echoing into the darkness above. The attic was a graveyard of forgotten objects, dust-covered trunks, moth-eaten furniture, and boxes sealed, shut with yellowing tape. The smell was worse up here, a heavy mix of rot and something metallic. In a far corner, under a pile of decaying blankets, I found a trunk, heavy and worn, its leather bindings cracked like dry skin. When I opened it, a pungent scent burst out, earthy, damp, with a sharp metallic tang. Inside was an old quilt, yellowed with time. At first glance, it was just a curious relic. But as my light fell across it, I noticed something strange, the stitching. It wasn't thread. It was long, dark strands of hair, intricately woven into swirling, almost ritualistic patterns. A chill raced up my spine. My instincts screamed to leave it alone. I dropped the quilt back into the trunk and turned to leave. That's when I heard it in a soft rustling, like something moving inside the fabric. I froze. Maybe it was just the quilt settling, I told myself. But the sound was too intentional. I turned back, flashlight shaking slightly in my hand. The hair stitching shimmered under the beam, absorbing the light. I should have closed the trunk. Should have walked away, but I didn't. I spread the quilt out on the dusty floor. The stench hit stronger now, like wet soil mixed with old blood. Among the patches, I noticed faint symbols, almost hidden in the weave. Runes, glyphs. I didn't recognize them, but they felt ancient. A gust of cold air passed through the attic, rippling the quilt. But there were no windows up here. No vents. I shivered, backing away. My heart pounded as I stared at the fabric. The strands of hair twitched. I swear they did. Before I could move, a whisper drifted from the quilt itself, low and distinct. I leaned in, trying to make it out. The sound cut off, replaced by a hiss, sharp and angry. The air grew thick, humming with static. I backed up slowly, fear choking. My throat, then, clear as day, the whisper returned. It wasn't from the quilt this time. It was right next to my ear. Done. Single quotes, T dot dot dot, leave dot 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 me. I dropped a flashlight. The beam spun wildly across the attic as I ran, crashing down the stairs. The attic door slammed shut behind me with enough force to shake the entire house. Part 2. Bound one collapsed against. The attic door, heart hammering in my chest. Was that real? I asked myself, had I imagined it? But the voice had been right there. I didn't sleep that night. I barricaded the attic door with a chair and sat in the hallway with every light on. The house was silent, but the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. The next morning, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was just exhausted. Maybe the house was playing tricks on me. But something deep in my gut told me I'd touched something. I wasn't supposed to. I didn't go back to the attic. Instead, I stayed downstairs, trying to ignore the creaks and groans that seemed to grow louder by the hour. By evening, I'd convinced myself it was over, until I checked my phone. There was a photo in my gallery I hadn't taken. My hands trembled as I opened it. The attic, the quilt. But different. The patches seemed to move, breathe, and in the center, hunched over it, was a shadowy figure. I deleted immediately, heart racing. Then came a text. You found it? Now you must finish what they started. I dropped the phone. My skin went cold. The house hummed again, faint but building. I ran to the front door, locked. A deadbolt wouldn't turn. The handle was stuck. I tried the windows sealed, trapped, and above me. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, back and forth in the attic. The whisper came again, echoing through the house. Finish it. Finish it, dot, 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 now, dot, dot. I grabbed my flashlight and forced myself up the stairs again. The attic door creaked open on its own. The quilt lay fully unfurled, glowing faintly in the dark. More symbols had appeared fresh, and now stitched not just in hair, but in blood. My blood. There were strands of my own hair woven into the seams. I tried to destroy it. I lunged with scissors from a sewing kit nearby. But the moment metal touched fabric, the attic shook. The quilt twisted violently, wrapping around my wrist like a living thing. Finish it, or they'll never rest. Then came the roar. From under the floorboards, pale hands reached upward, grasping at my feet. My mind screamed. I remembered a line from a journal I'd found. If the binding is incomplete, the blood of the living must seal the pact. Dot, dot, dot. My blood. I picked up the scissors again and slashed my palm. Blood spilled onto the quilt. Instantly, the attic convulsed. The whispers turned to shrieks. The quilt absorbed every drop. Then, fire. The quilt burst into blue flame, disintegrating into ash within seconds. Silence fell. I stumbled down the stairs, half-conscious, drenched in sweat. At the front door, I heard a final whisper. Thank you. But just as I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. New message. You think it's over? We're still here. I looked back. In the reflection of the attic window, something moved, and it was smiling. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the quilt, its hair-stitched patterns moving ever so slightly, like a living thing trying to breathe. I kept the lights on, locked my bedroom door, and shoved a dresser in front of it, as if that would keep anything unnatural out. But it wasn't the attic that terrified me now. It was the thought that something had followed me down. At some point near dawn, exhaustion finally won. I drifted into an uneasy sleep, jolting awake at the slightest creak of the house. I was hoping I'd dreamed it all, that the whispers and the twitching quilt were just products of a tired, overstimulated mind. But hope is fragile, because when I checked my phone, something was off. My battery was at 66%, not strange in itself, but I hadn't used it all night. Then I opened my photo gallery. There was a new photo. Taken at 3:17 a.m., my blood ran cold. It was of me sleeping, my face half covered in shadow, my mouth slightly open, as if mid-whimper. The angle was low, like it had been taken from the floor beside my bed. I dropped the phone, backing away from it like it might bite. My stomach twisted. I was alone. The doors had been locked. No one else was in the house, and yet someone had been watching me. I retrieved the phone with trembling hands and checked my messages. There was one from an unknown number. You touched it. Now you're part of it. I stared at the screen, fingers numb. It felt like the walls around me leaned in. The light bulbs dimmed slightly, like the house had taken a breath. And then I heard it. Footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate, walking the exact same path I'd taken in the attic. I stood frozen in the living room, too afraid to move. I knew I should leave. Call the police. Run. But the moment I stepped toward the front door, something shifted. The doorknob twisted on its own. Not just turned twisted, like someone or something on the other side was wringing it, like a wet cloth. It creaked and groaned, warping in its socket. I backed away. A whisper curled down from the ceiling. Finish it. Or we'll finish you. Those words repeated themselves over and over in my head. Finish what? What ritual? What curse? My family had never spoken of this place, only left it to me in a will, like it was an afterthought. I had to understand. I had to know what the quilt was, why it was made of hair, why it whispered like a dying thing. I returned to the attic. The stairs moaned beneath my feet. The air grew colder with each step. The door at the top was ajar, though I remembered slamming it shut the night before. Inside, the attic looked untouched, except for the quilt. It was unfurled again, completely spread across the floor like a tapestry in waiting. And at its center, something new had appeared. A small, leather-bound journal. It hadn't been there before. I hesitated, then knelt and picked it up. The cover was cracked and dry, the pages yellowed and brittle. The handwriting inside was erratic, fading in places, sometimes written in jagged, almost frenzied strokes. It seemed to be the account of someone named Ellis Harper, a relative, maybe, someone who had lived here before. The entries were fragmented, obsessive. They spoke of a weaving circle, a family tradition, one passed down through bloodlines, a quilt sewn from hair and sealed with blood, meant to bind the dead. Each square a memory, each strand a tether, a ritual of containment. The quilt keeps them silent. Without it, the house opens. One page was stained with what looked like dried blood. The writing became nearly illegible after that, scrawled. In a panic. It's hungry. It needs more. It said I must sew the last square with my own hair. I dropped the journal and stared at the quilt. The symbols woven into it seemed brighter now. The strands of hair moved subtly, as if stirred by breath. One of them, a long dark one, was unmistakably mine. I hadn't added it. I hadn't gone near the quilt since last night. And yet, it had me now. I tried to leave the attic, but the door wouldn't budge. It closed with a hard thud, locking from the inside. The flashlight flickered. The floor began to hum, a low vibration building under my knees. Then the quilt whispered again. Only this time I could understand it. Your blood or your thread. Finish the patch. The house wanted a sacrifice. I rummaged through old boxes in the attic and found a rusted pair of scissors. With trembling hands, I pulled a strand of hair from my head and leaned toward the quilt. As I touched the fabric, the attic pulsed with energy, the temperature plummeting. I snipped the hair. The strand slithered from my fingers and vanished into the quilt, weaving itself between the patches. The humming stopped. The attic went still, and the door opened behind me. I stumbled out, gasping like I'd just escaped drowning. The hallway outside was silent. The house, for the first time since I arrived, felt ... home. But it wasn't over. Because as I walked past a mirror on the wall, I saw something that wasn't there before burned into the reflection of my face, behind my eyes. A symbol, one of the runes from the quilt. The symbol in the mirror didn't leave. No matter how many times I blinked, splashed water on my face, or turned the light off and on, it was still there etched behind my irises. Faint but unmistakable. A swirling knot of lines, just like the runes embroidered into the quilt. It wasn't visible in real life, only in reflections. As if the house was trying to remind me, we see you. You belong now. The calm didn't last. By nightfall, the air was thick with pressure again. The walls creaked like they were exhaling. The floors moaned under phantom footsteps. Every window was fogged from the inside, like something warm and breathing had pressed against the glass. I tried to call anyone. My phone had full signal, but every time I tapped a number, the screen would flicker and restart. I opened the browser. It loaded one page. A photo of the quilt, but this time it looked different. A face was sewn into the fabric, pale, eyes stitched shut, mouth sealed with hair. Familiar. It was mine. I dropped the phone. It buzzed once, then died. I ran back to the attic. I don't know why. Maybe I thought confronting it would make it stop. Maybe I wanted to see if I could undo what I'd already done. The attic door was already open. Inside, the quilt had changed again. Now, it covered nearly the entire floor. The symbols were brighter, more defined. New strands of hair had appeared, arranged in spirals and veins. Some were black, others blonde. Some gray and wiry. Dozens of colors, dozens of lives. And the center, where I'd last seen the journal, there was something else. A sewing needle, large, ornate, iron. It pulsed with a strange heat, as if it had just been pulled from a fire. I hesitated to touch it, but I didn't need to because suddenly I remembered it. Not in the way you remember old dreams or vague déjà vu. This was something deeper, more visceral. My hand twitched involuntarily toward the needle. I pulled back, trembling. That's when the memories came, not mine. They flooded in like a broken dam, visions, sounds, feelings. The attic full of women in black dresses, kneeling in a circle, chanting in a language I didn't know. Hair snipped from screaming mouths. Blood dripping onto fabric, needles pulling sorrow into the stitches. This wasn't a craft. It was a curse. A binding? The quilt wasn't a keepsake, it was a tomb. A patchwork prison for spirits that couldn't move on. And now, it was breaking. The seals were fading, and I was the next square. I stumbled back toward the door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. The light flickered. The attic grew ice cold. Then, a voice, not whispered this time, not distant. It was right behind me. She didn't finish. You must. I turned slowly. There was nothing. Just air. Empty space. But the shadows were darker now, thicker, like they had mass. The floor beneath the quilt began to bulge upward, like something underneath was pressing through. Desperate, I grabbed the needle. It burned my skin. Images flashed behind my eyes. A child sewn into the center of the quilt, crying, silenced. Covered, hair pulled tight to keep her shut. And suddenly I understood. The quilt wasn't just holding the dead. It was feeding on them. Every leg sewn into it was consumed, their memories stitched into the runes, their souls tethered for eternity. It was insatiable and unfinished. That's why it called to me. Why it showed up in the will. My ancestor Ellis Harper had tried to escape this place, but failed. She had started the ritual and left it incomplete. The house couldn't rest. The quilt couldn't be destroyed. It needed blood, memory, hair. It needed closure, or a new body. The attic trembled. Something knocked against the underside of the floor. Boom, 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 boomy. 3 knocks like someone trapped beneath the boards. The quilt rippled again. A long strand of black hair slithered toward my boot, brushing the tip of my shoe like a finger. I had to end it. I looked around, spotting an old oil lantern in the corner. I grabbed it, ripped off the top, and poured the kerosene across the fabric. The scent hit hard, sharp, chemical, alive. As I struck a match, the whispers returned, panicked, pleading. No, not yet. We're not done. We're not. I dropped the flame, The quilt erupted in blue fire. The voices screamed, howling as the flames raced across the attic floor. The hair curled and blackened, the fabric shriveling. The heat was unbearable. I ducked low, covering my mouth with my sleeve, crawling toward the stairs. But just as I reached the door, it slammed shut again. Something yanked me backward. The quilt, even burning, still moved. Its threads whipped like tendrils, trying to wrap around my ankles. My heart pounded as I kicked free, slamming my shoulder into the door until it burst open. I tumbled down the stairs. Smoke followed me. When I looked back, the attic was glowing light pouring through the cracks in the ceiling. A deep, guttural roar echoed through the walls like a dying beast. And then silence, the light died, the air stilled. The house felt completely unnaturally quiet. I lay on the floor, gasping, my hands singed, my eyes burning. But it was done. The quilt was gone. I thought I was free. But freedom has a cost. Because when I looked down at my arms, the symbol was still there, and it had spread. The symbol had spread overnight. When I woke up the next morning, still on the hardwood floor of the hallway, my arm was itching. I pulled up my sleeve and nearly screamed. The rune that had once been just behind my eyes in the mirror had now appeared on my skin, red, raw, and pulsing like a burn. But worse than that, it was growing. Fine lines crept from it like veins, crawling up toward my shoulder and down. My wrist, it wasn't just a mark, it was a claim. I stumbled to the bathroom and scrubbed at it with soap, hot water, even a rough bristled brush. Nothing worked. In fact, the more I scrubbed, the deeper the lines seemed to sink into my skin. Like they were burrowing inward. My reflection was worse. I didn't look like myself. My face was pale, sunken, the veins around my eyes dark and webbed. The bags under them were purple, hollow. And yet, in the mirror's background, I could see the attic door, wide open. Smoke stains ringed the ceiling above it, black fingers, reaching outward like the last gasp of something that should have died. But the fire hadn't ended anything. It had only awakened what was inside. I knew I couldn't stay. I needed answers, real ones. I dug through every box in the house, searching for anything that could tell me more. Eventually, buried in the back of an old closet, I found it. A small wooden box, locked with an iron clasp. It had my last name carved into it. Harper. The key was still inside a rusted sewing tin nearby. I opened it. Inside was a stack of letters and a photo block and white, brittle with age. The image showed 5 women standing in a circle around something ... folded. A quilt. They weren't smiling. Their eyes were wide, almost fearful. Each of them held a needle. One woman in the middle looked directly into the camera. Ellis Harper. She looked like me. I unfolded the top letter. It was written in hurried script, ink smudged. To whoever finds this, the quilt was never meant to hold them forever. The binding weakens with time. Every thread sewn in pain unravels in anger. If you've seen it, heard it, then it knows you, and it won't stop until you've either finished what was started or joined the fabric. My throat went dry. The letter ended with a final line, underlined twice. Don't sleep. If you dream, it can take you. I didn't realize how tired I was until I read those words. My body was screaming for rest, my eyes heavy. I hadn't properly slept since. The night I found the quilt. Every time I drifted off, the whispers crept in. But now, I was terrified to even blink. I stayed awake as long as I could, drank coffee, walked laps through the hall, blasted music into my ears. But it didn't matter. Eventually, my body gave out. I collapsed on the couch. And the dream began, only it didn't feel like a dream. It felt realer than waking life. I was back in the attic. The quilt was whole again, unburned, vibrant, pulsing. The runes glowed a dull red. And around it, the women from the photo stood in a perfect circle, only now they had no eyes. Their mouths hung open, hair trailing from their lips like threads, pulled from the throat. They didn't speak, but I heard them all the same. You were chosen. You must finish the last square. I looked down. My arms were stitched into the quilt. I screamed, pulled, tugged, but I couldn't move. I was part of it now. Sewn into the fabric, my veins turned to thread. My heartbeat was the rhythm of the needle. Then something crawled toward me. A child. Small, pale. Her eyes were black voids. Her mouth was stitched shut. She held out a lock of hair, my hair, and placed it in my lap. The quilt rose behind her like a wave. Before it could consume me, I woke up, covered in sweat, shaking, but worse. My arm was now completely marked. The symbol had spread to my collarbone. I checked the mirror. There was someone else behind me. For a split second, I saw her, one of the women from the photo, Ellis. Her translucent reflection stood in the bathroom doorway, watching me, her mouth twitching as if trying to speak through thread. When I turned, she was gone. But her voice lingered in my ears. The final stitch is yours. That night, I didn't bother locking any doors. What was the point? I knew now this thing wasn't just inside the house, it was inside me. My blood, my mind, my memories. The quilt didn't burn. Not really. It just went deeper. Beneath the house. Beneath my skin. I tried one last thing. I went into the backyard and dug. Where the crawl space met the base of the house, there was a patch of disturbed soil, loose, almost like something had been buried. 3 feet down, I hit something hard. Wood. A coffin-sized box. I pried it open. It was filled with hair. Miles and miles of it, coiled and braided, soaked in old blood. And at the very bottom, a spool of thread made from what looked like human sinew. Next to it, a pair of shears, clean, polished, waiting. The whispers returned, clear, loud. Finish it, or be finished. The box of hair hadn't just been hidden, it had been sealed, nailed shut from the inside. I kept staring at the polished shears, the slick spool of human sinew, and the massive braid of black, red, and gray hair coiled at the bottom of the coffin-like crate. The scent coming from it wasn't just rot anymore, it was coppery, sweet, like old blood laced with perfume. And as I stared down at it, I realized something horrifying. Each lock of hair was labeled with a small tag. Ellis Harper. Margaret. Harper. Joan Harper. My blood ran cold. There were over a dozen names, all with the same surname, my family's. Every tag marked with dates of birth, and no death. The quilt hadn't just consumed them. It had bound them. Souls stitched into. Memory. Bloodline woven into eternity. And now my name would be next. I stumbled back from the box, heart hammering in my chest. I didn't want any part of this. I didn't want to be a Harper. I didn't want this house, this inheritance, this nightmare. But I had no choice. The whispers were back, louder now. 1 stitch left. Bind it. Or we take you thread by thread. I slammed the box shut and ran inside, half mad with fear. The house responded instantly, lights flickering. Floorboards warping, the very air vibrating with pressure. I could feel it in my bones now, a tension that twisted every joint, every nerve. I grabbed the journal again and flipped to the back. A final page hadn't appeared, one I swore hadn't been there before. The handwriting was no longer desperate. It was calm, precise. To complete the binding, the final descendant must surrender a memory, a lock, and a wound. Only then can the fabric rest. But beware, if the memory is false, the quilt unravels, and the punishment is permanent. A memory, a lock of hair, a wound. That's what it wanted. That's what I had to give. I returned to the attic. The floorboards groaned under my steps like they were reluctant to allow me passage. But when I reached the top, the door didn't fight me this time. It swung open, slow and silent. The quilt was back, laid out again, impossibly untouched. Not a trace of burn or scorch remained. It had healed itself. And at its center, a blank square awaited empty fabric, woven from pale gray threads that shimmered under the attic light. It was waiting for me. I sat down in front of it, took the shears, cut a lock of my own hair. It slithered out of my hand, stitching itself into the square. Next, a wound. With trembling fingers, I pricked the tip of my finger. A single bead of blood welled up. The moment it touched the fabric, the entire quilt pulsed like a heartbeat. The attic groaned. Shadows recoiled. The air turned sharp and metallic. Now, the memory. I closed my eyes, trying to conjure one real enough, pure enough. I thought of my mother holding my hand as a child. The way she would hum while brushing. My hair before bed. The scent of lavender in her sweater. The warmth of being loved. I whispered it aloud. The quilt accepted it. The blank square began to glow, the hair and blood fusing with the threads, forming a new rune, this one simpler, softer, like a final note in a song long unfinished. Then the house exhaled. I swear to God it did. All the tension in the walls, the pressure in the air, the weight of those voices, it lifted. Like the whole structure had been holding its breath for decades and finally let it go. But just as I stood to leave, something changed. The attic door slammed shut. The light bulb overhead popped, plunging me into darkness. The quilt began to twitch, not violently, not like before. It was subtle now, like a ripple passing through a calm lake. And then a figure rose from its center. Not crawled, rose, a woman, tall, thin, her eyes stitched shut with crimson thread. Her mouth sealed by a braid of her own hair, her arms were outstretched, palms facing upward. Alice Harper. She was beautiful and terrible all at once. Not decaying. Or monstrous, just wrong. Her body shimmered like she wasn't fully here, or maybe not entirely there, and she stepped toward me. I couldn't move. She knelt, inches from my face. I expected a scream, an attack. But instead, she reached for my arm, the one marked by the symbol. She touched it with a single finger. The rune flared, then dissolved. Vanished, she smiled. The braid sealing her lips unraveled and fell to the floor. And she whispered, with a voice like moths fluttering against glass, "Thank you." Then she was gone, vanished into threads of light that sank back into the quilt. The attic fell silent. I stood there alone in the dark, barely breathing, and then the quilt disintegrated. Piece by piece, square by square, the fabric unstitched itself, floating upward like ashes caught in wind. The hair unwound. The runes faded, the voices silenced, until all that was left was dust and silence. After the quilt vanished, I didn't move for a long time. The attic was quiet, eerily so. Not the kind of silence that felt peaceful, but the silence that follows something catastrophic. Like standing in the eye of a storm and not knowing if it's truly past. I walked slowly back down the attic stairs, half expecting them to collapse beneath me. But the house didn't groan this time. The walls didn't breathe. The shadows didn't stretch. It felt different, lighter. The hallway, once warped and soaked in that oppressive, damp air, now smelled of old wood and dust. Is that no rot, no iron tang, no mildew? The mirrors were just mirrors again. My reflection was my own. The runes were gone from my skin, but I wasn't the same. I knew that. Something inside me had changed, something subtle, but irreversible. I had carried out the binding, finished the last stitch. But part of me had been woven into it in the process. I could feel it, like a phantom limb or a song you can't get out of your head even though the lyrics are long forgotten. I went to the backyard one last time and checked the soil where I had found the box of hair. It was sealed again. No trace of the wooden crate, no scent, no blood, just earth. I stood there staring at the dirt, wondering if the house had buried. It tucked it away like a sleeping child, now that its hunger was sated. In the weeks that followed, I made arrangements to leave. I couldn't stay. The house may have been at peace, but I wasn't. Every time I stepped into a room, I remembered. Every time I saw a shadow move just slightly from the corner of my eye, I wondered if Alice Harper or one of the others had come back. But they didn't, not in the waking world. It was the dreams that changed. They weren't nightmares anymore. Not exactly. They were fragments of memories that weren't mine. I'd see flashes of hands threading hair through needles. Women humming in circles, laughter, tears, rituals. Sometimes I saw the child, the one whose mouth had been sewn. Shut. But now, in my dreams, she smiled. Her lips were free. She spoke. You heard us, she'd say. That's all we wanted. I kept the letters and the photo in a small box, though I didn't dare read through them again. I didn't need to. Everything that mattered had already been passed into me. That was the cost. Not death. Not possession. But memory. Legacy. I was the last Harper now and the last one who had to carry the weight of that quilt. Or so I thought. 3 months after I left the house, I received a package. No return address. No stamps. Just a plain cardboard box left on the doorstep of my new apartment. I stared at it for hours before opening it. Inside was a single item. A needle. Iron. Ornate. Identical to the one from the attic. Wrapped around it was a lock of blonde hair, not mine. No explanation. Just that. I stared at it for a long time, my chest tightening. I should have been terrified. Maybe I was. But beneath the fear was something deeper. Recognition. Like the house was speaking again. Or maybe the quilt was never bound to the attic at all. Maybe it was bound to me. That night, I had the worst dream yet. I was standing in a long hallway made of stitched fabric walls of patchwork, floor-worn squares. Each step I took unraveled thread beneath my feet, revealing faces, hundreds of them, their mouths open in silent screams. At the end of the hallway was a mirror, and when I looked into it, I didn't see myself. I saw a new version of the quilt, complete, my face stitched right into the center. A final rune glowed over my reflection, one I hadn't seen before. I woke up choking on a strand of hair. I've tried moving again twice. Each time, a new item appears in the mail. A lock of hair. A photo with blurred faces. One time, a scrap of fabric. All from nowhere. All familiar. I burned them. Buried them. Even threw one in the river. But they keep coming back. It's not the house anymore. It's the legacy. It's the thread. It runs through my blood. Through my thoughts. Sometimes I catch myself humming the same tune the women and the dreams did. And I don't even realize it until it's too late. The quilt is gone. But something was stitched into me that night in the attic. And it's still growing. Sometimes I wake up in the morning with fresh strands of hair coiled beside my pillow, tied neatly into loops. Sometimes I find a needle on the knit stand still warm, as if recently used. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear it whispering through the trees outside my apartment window. One more stitch. Just one more. They say cities don't sleep, but my street always did. It was quiet, tucked in a far corner of a neighborhood that had long forgotten the pulse of nightlife. I liked that about it. It was the kind of stillness that lulled you to sleep, the kind of darkness that made you feel safe, until the night he showed up. It started like any other, me in pajamas, brushing my teeth, letting some podcast drone on in the background while the city's glow seeped through the window blinds. But just as I reached to pull the curtains closed, I caught sight of someone standing. Across the street, a man, perfectly still, wearing a bright red suit. It was so out of place that my first reaction was to laugh. Who the hell wears something like that at midnight? Maybe a drunk guy heading home from a costume party. Maybe an eccentric neighbor, but something about him didn't match any of that. He wasn't leaning or shifting like people naturally do. He didn't look around or check his phone. He just stood there, staring straight up at my third floor window. At me. His face was obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. I couldn't make out any features, but I felt his eyes on me. Heavy, intent, like a weight pressing into my chest. I lingered at the window for a few minutes, waiting for him to move. When he didn't, I closed the curtain with a huff and told myself to ignore it. Maybe it was a weirdo, sure, but it wasn't my problem. I lay in bed that night, eyes on the ceiling, mind racing. I kept imagining him still down there, unmoving, neck craned upward, watching my apartment like it held something he wanted. Every time I blinked, I saw the red of his suit burn against the blackness behind my eyelids. Eventually, exhaustion took me. But I dreamt of tapping. The next night he was back. Same time, same spot, same posture. Only this time he was closer to the curb, just a few feet nearer than the night before. My stomach twisted when I saw him. It was like watching a movie you knew the ending to, but you kept hoping it would. Change. I stared at him for a long time, unsure what to do. Was this some kind of harassment? A prank? The red suit glowed under the pale orange of the streetlights, too vibrant, too clean, like it hadn't collected a single speck of dust or dirt in decades. The wind pulled lightly at his jacket, but he never adjusted it, never moved. Not even. A shiver. I turned the lights off and stood behind the curtain, watching. He didn't move once, not even when a stray cat skittered past or when a car turned down the street and passed through his silhouette like smoke. That was when I started to feel afraid, because the man in the red suit didn't cast a shadow. By the third night, my sleep was ruined. I tried to ignore it, blasted the TV at full volume, wore noise-canceling headphones, even drank half a bottle of cheap wine to dull the growing dread. But just before midnight, I found myself drawn back to the window like a magnet. And there, he was again, closer, one full step forward. He hadn't moved while I watched him, but he was undeniably closer than before. His face still veiled by shadow, his wide-brimmed hat casting that impossible darkness. He stood under the exact same streetlight, but the light seemed to bend around him. It gave him an outline, but no detail. He was color, but not flesh, shape, but not man. I grabbed my phone, took a picture, but when I looked at the screen, it was just static. A wash of digital noise, like the camera couldn't focus on whatever he was. I tried a second time, same result. Frustrated, I opened the window and yelled, "Hey, who the hell are you? What do you want?" Nothing. No flinch. No response. Just that same silent presence. I slammed the window shut. But then tap. 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 He was suddenly at the base of my building. Still not moving, still staring. But I could hear it somehow, the tapping, even though I was 3 stories up and all my windows were closed. The sound wasn't coming from the outside anymore. It was coming from inside my walls. That night I barely slept. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear it again, tap, tap, like a slow, deliberate finger dragging across glass. I pulled the covers over my head, clutched my phone, and tried to drown it all out. But then my phone buzzed, a message. No name, no number. Why don't you come to the window? I want to see you better. I dropped the phone. My mouth went dry. My blood turned to ice. He knew I was there. How? How did he know? I hadn't even looked outside yet. My lights were off, curtains drawn. He shouldn't have known I was watching, but he did. The tapping stopped, replaced by a slow, dragging knock of vibration that shuddered through the wall behind me. I crept toward the window, knees weak, heart pounding. I parted the curtain, just a crack. And there he was, now standing beneath my window, his head tilted so far back it looked broken. His face was still hidden, but something glinted beneath the brim of his hat. Not eyes, not teeth, something else. And then I heard it again. Not through my ears, but inside my head. Let me in. I stumbled back from the curtain, like it had burned me. That voice, "Let me in," was still ringing in my head, but not like sound. It had no echo, no air. It crawled through me, like it had been sewn into my thoughts with thread I couldn't tear out. I didn't look out the window again. Instead, I grabbed my phone and tried calling the police. My hands trembled so badly. I nearly dropped it. The dial tone never even came. The moment I pressed call, the screen flickered, glitched, and then went black. When it finally lit up again, I found another message waiting. Same unknown number. "You're already watching." Wanna say hello? I nearly threw the phone. But before I could, I noticed something else. My wallpaper had changed. Instead of my usual black background, it was now an image of the outside of my building, with a red figure looking up. It was taken from an angle I couldn't explain, like someone was floating above the street and aiming down at me from midair. There were no metadata, no timestamp. No app registered the photo being taken. I opened my gallery. Dozens more had been saved. Each one from a different angle, all of them with me in the frame, sleeping, showering, eating. In every single one, somewhere in the shadows, stood the man in the red suit, tiny and obscured in some corner, watching, always watching. I tore the curtains down. If he wanted to see me, fine. I wasn't hiding anymore. I turned on every light in the apartment, checked every lock on every window, and even slid the sofa in front of the front door. I felt ridiculous, but not nearly as ridiculous as I felt powerless. And yet, through it all, I could feel his presence. Outside, not movement, pressure, the weight of his eyes. A silent demand to be acknowledged. Around 3 a.m., the lights began to flicker again. Short bursts at first, like a power surge. But then the bulbs dimmed until they were just barely glowing, and in that half dark, I saw shadows begin to stretch. Across the floor, up the walls, toward me. But there was no one near me. The shadows weren't mine, they were his. That night I didn't sleep. I sat curled on the couch, the lamp beside me flickering like it was running out of strength. I clutched the lighter from the kitchen drawer, a cheap beast lighter, the only flame I could control, and stared at the window. There was no tapping. No knocking. Just stillness. But the silence had grown heavier, like it was thick a velvet curtain draped across the world, muffling everything except my heartbeat. At some point, I must have dozed off. When I woke, it was dawn. The sky outside was a soft blue. Birds chirped, and traffic had returned. The man in the red suit was gone. I convinced myself it had been a hallucination. A long, stress-fueled breakdown. Sleep deprivation. Overwork. I took the day off, bought blackout blinds, changed my number, reset my phone completely, and deleted every image in my gallery. I even bought a baseball bat and kept it beside the bed. And for the next 2 days, nothing happened. No man in red, no messages, no shadows. I started to breathe again. Until the third night, when I found a gift box on my doorstep, wrapped in red paper, with no tag, no name. Inside was a hat, a wide-brimmed, shadow-casting red hat, just like the one he wore. And beneath it, tucked neatly into the lining, was a folded photo. It was standing at the window, looking terrified. Taken from just a few feet behind me inside my apartment. I didn't go back inside. I ran downstairs, across the street, through the neighborhood. I didn't stop until I was at my friend Rob's place, breathless and drenched in sweat. He let me in without question, and I told him everything. He thought I was joking at first. Then he saw the photo. He flipped it over and found something. I had noticed on the back was written, in that same deep red font from the text messages, "You moved the curtain." I moved the door. I stayed with Rob that night. And for once, I slept. No tapping, no whispers. Just blessed, dreamless sleep. But the next morning, he woke me up with a pale face and a shaking hand. He handed me his phone. Bro, this was taken outside my window. At 3:17 a.m., it was a photo. Same red suit, same wide-brimmed hat. Only this time, he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Rob. I wanted to believe it was fake, that Rob was screwing with me. But the fear in his face wasn't something you could fake. Not that wide-eyed, skin-drained kind of fear that makes your hands shake without you realizing it. The photo showed the man in the red suit standing in the middle of Rob's backyard, right beneath the bedroom window where I'd slept. His head was tilted back in that unnatural way, neck bent too far, like something broken inside still held tension. The timestamp was accurate, 3:17 a.m. That meant he had followed me. Or worse, he had always known where I would go. Rob backed, away from his phone like it might bite him. Dude, I thought you were exaggerating. But this is not normal. We agreed to call the police. I didn't even know what to report. A guy keeps showing up outside my place, never moves, never speaks, and maybe talks directly into my brain. Yeah, that would go over well. Still, I tried. Told them a man had been stalking me. Sent in the photos. They said they'd send someone to my apartment to check it out. But something in the officer's tone made my stomach knot. A kind of half interest, like he'd heard this before, but not from me. When I asked if others had made similar complaints, he paused. Sir, are you currently under any medication or experiencing signs of emotional distress? That's when I hung up. We didn't go back to my place. Rob let me crash on his couch again. That night, we set up 2 phones to record, one in his room, one facing out the back window. We even turned on motion sensors and downloaded a noise detection app, and then we waited. Midnight came. Nothing. 1 a.m., still nothing. At 2:12, the motion detector pinged. Then the noise app buzzed. We froze. Rob picked up his phone, hands trembling, and checked the camera feed. There he was, standing right outside the back door, facing the window. His red suit looked almost liquid in the black and white night vision. The fabric shimmered like it wasn't stitched but poured over him skin tight, unnatural, and his face still hidden, still tilted. Except now, he was closer to the camera than ever before, too close, like he wanted us to see him. Then the phone vibrated in my pocket. I'm already inside. The house fell silent. Rob and I just stared at each other. Neither of us spoke. Our eyes slowly turned toward the hallway that led to the kitchen. The doorknob to the backyard began to turn. We both jumped. Rob grabbed a chair. I grabbed my phone. The knob kept turning, slow and steady, even though we had locked it, and then it stopped. Dead still. The room seemed to hold its breath. We waited and waited, and then we heard it. A whisper. Right behind us. Found you. We spun around, but no one was there. The air grew cold. That familiar pressure wrapped around my chest, squeezing until my lungs ached. The lights flickered once, twice, and then blew out entirely. What happened next is hard to describe in words, because the moment the lights died, I felt like the house changed. The layout was the same, but everything felt elongated. The shadows became structures. The walls breathed. I grabbed Rob and pulled him toward the front door. We yanked. It opened and sprinted into the street. No red suit, no man. Just silence. And then my phone buzzed again. Another message? Running doesn't matter. I'm always where you are. We stayed in a motel that night, not a cheap one. Somewhere with security cameras, lit parking lots, and constant foot traffic. We didn't sleep. Rob played back the footage from his cameras. But something was wrong with the files. They were corrupted. Every frame that had shown the man in the red suit had been overwritten with static. Only one photo remained. And it wasn't even a video still. It was a selfie, taken while I was asleep. I was lying in Rob's bed, and behind me, peeking out, from the closet door, was a sliver of red. We left town the next day. Didn't say goodbye to neighbors. Didn't check on my apartment. We packed light, drove out in Rob's truck, and got as far from the city as we could. We stayed with his cousin, a ranger in a national park. No cell reception, no Wi-Fi, nothing but trees and silence. And for a little while, I thought maybe we'd outrun it. But I should have known better. The red suit isn't something you escape. It's something you invite. 1 week later, I went hiking alone. Just a short walk. Nothing big. The trail was empty. I made it 2 miles out when I stopped to drink water, and I saw them. Footprints. Deep. Precise. Too large to be mine. And leading straight toward me. My blood ran cold. When I turned around, he was there. Not standing across the street. Not outside my window. Standing 3 feet away. Just watching. He didn't move. Didn't speak. But in my head, his voice returned. You let me in once. I never left. I stumbled backward on the trail, my foot catching on a rock, and I went down hard. Pain shot through my arm as I landed, but I barely noticed. All I could do was stare at him, the man in the red suit towering over me. He didn't move, didn't blink. The forest around us was dead silent, like nature itself was holding its breath. No birds. No wind. Just him, that vivid red suit, far too bright for the woods, and that wide-brimmed hat casting shadows where shadows had no business being. I scrambled backward, my hands scraping against dirt and gravel. My heartbeat pounded in my ears like war drums, but he still didn't move. It was as if he was waiting for me to speak, to run, to break. The moment I turned and ran, I heard it, that voice in my head again, louder than ever, like it had been waiting to explode. There is no distance you can travel that I have not already reached. The forest became a blur. Trees zipped past, in streaks of brown and green. My lungs burned, legs pumping harder than they ever had in my life. But with every few feet, that voice came again. I am your shadow. I am your breath. I am your window. I didn't dare look back. Some part of me knew he wasn't chasing me in the way a man would chase. He didn't need to. He would just be there. Every time I turned around, I knew I'd see him closer, deeper, more inside. I burst back through the trees toward the rangers. Cabin, screaming Rob's name. My voice was hoarse, torn raw from the inside. Rob flung open the door as I collapsed in a heap, babbling incoherently. He dragged me inside, locked the door, pulled the blinds. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't have to. He saw it in my eyes. We spent the next 3 hours with our backs to the wall, armed with bear spray and a rusted old shotgun Rob kept for emergencies. The cabin was small, one room, a bathroom, a cot, and a kitchen table. No closets, nowhere to hide. That was the problem. He didn't need a place to hide. He just was. At exactly 3 a.m., the lights flickered once. Just once. A warning. Then came the knock. Not at the door. At the window, the one behind us. Rob turned slowly, lifting the shotgun as he stepped to the window. I reached out, trying to stop him, to tell him not to look, but it was too late. He peeked out through the curtain and whispered, "Oh God, he's smiling." Then the lights cut out completely. What happened next was chaos. The room went dark, no moonlight, no firelight. Pitch black. I fumbled for my phone, but it wouldn't turn on. Rob fired the shotgun just once, and the sound was deafening, shaking the walls. But it didn't stop the whisper. That horrible whisper, now echoing from every corner of the room. It was his voice again, but multiplied, layered, like 100. Versions of him were speaking at once. Let me wear you. Let me be your skin. Let me see through your eyes. I dropped to my knees, hands over my ears, screaming just to drown it out. My body felt like it was vibrating, bones trembling under some invisible weight. Then everything stopped. The lights came back on, and Rob was gone. There was no sign of a struggle. No blood, no broken windows. The door was locked from the inside. The shotgun lay on the floor, undisturbed. But Rob had vanished. His boots were still by the door. His phone still on the counter. Even the mug of tea he'd made was still steaming. It was like he'd been plucked out of existence. But I knew. He hadn't been taken. He'd been opened. Like a window, and something else had climbed. Inside, the next few days were a blur. I stayed at a motel, this time far from the park, far from any city, far from everything. I barely slept, ate only when my body screamed for it. I didn't talk to anyone. But even in that isolation, he found me. Through flickering TVs, through static-filled radios, through whispers on the motel intercom, even though the receptionist swore no one had called my room. At 3 a.m. every night, the lights would flicker, and I'd feel him again, watching, waiting, and eventually, I snapped. Not in the way people do when they lose their minds, but in the way you do when you realize there's no exit. I took a permanent marker and began writing every message he'd sent on the motel walls, every whisper I remembered, every word he'd breathed into my skull. It covered the ceiling by the third night. The manager kicked me out on the fourth. I didn't fight it. That night, I stood on a roadside hill, looking out over a field, cold wind against my face, sky full of stars. For a moment, it was quiet, peaceful. Then I felt it. Not the sound, not the voice, just his breath. Huh, what? against my neck. He leaned in close, his voice now barely a whisper. I'm not stalking you. I'm becoming you. I ran again, not because I thought it would help, but because standing still meant he'd catch up or worse, slip inside. The roadside vanished beneath my feet as I stumbled along the gravel shoulder, lit only by the distant glow of passing headlights. I had no destination, just an instinct that if I kept moving, maybe he couldn't fully take hold of me. But I could feel him now, not behind me, not even next to me, but beneath my skin. The air smelled like sulfur. The sky overhead seemed darker than before. Even the moon looked wrong, pale, distant, like it had been drained. My phone buzzed. I didn't want to look, but I did. Unknown number. You're doing well. You wear me Nestle. I screamed and hurled the phone into the woods. It shattered against a tree, the screen cracking like glass over a mirror, reflecting a dozen tiny versions of his grinning face. Still, I ran. Eventually, I collapsed in a field miles outside town. No buildings, no lights, just a rotting barn that looked like it had been abandoned for decades. I crawled inside and curled up in a corner, my hands pressed against my ears. The whispers didn't stop. They just got smarter. They started sounding like me. You deserve this. You let him in. You're the one who opened the window. And in a way, they weren't wrong. That first night, when I pulled the curtain back just a little, that was the invitation. I hadn't said it out loud. I hadn't meant to say it at all. But I saw him and I watched back. That was all he needed. I don't remember falling asleep. I don't even remember dreaming. But when I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the barn. I was back in my apartment. Only it wasn't my apartment. It was perfect to perfect. The kind of perfect that exists only in memories or dreams. The walls were freshly painted. The windows clean. The furniture exactly how I liked it, but slightly off as if someone had recreated it from memory. I stepped toward the window, and there he was, standing outside. Same red suit, same hat, but now I could see his face. And it was my face, stretched, warped, smiling too wide, eyes black and hollow. He lifted his hand and waved. And I felt my own hand rise, unbidden, mimicking the gesture. My reflection in the glass did not match my body. I backed away, heart racing, but everything in the apartment began to shift. The walls bent inward, the furniture elongated, melting like wax. My breath caught in my throat, and then I saw it, the curtain. It fluttered, though there was no breeze. It pulled itself back, and the window opened, all on its own. He stepped inside. No sound, no weight to his footsteps. Just presence. Just inevitability. I tried to scream, but the sound came out in reverse, sucked back into my lungs like air. Being pulled into a vacuum. The man in the red suit smiled. You opened the window, and now I live inside it. He touched my chest with one elongated, claw-like finger, and I felt the glass. Cold, sharp, thin. My skin had become a pain, and he looked through it. Suddenly, I was outside again, looking up at myself, inside the window, watching and smiling. I woke up in a hospital. That's what they told me, anyway. White walls, monitors beeping, and 4 in my arm and a heart rate monitor next to me. The nurse said I was found in a cornfield 20 miles from town, unconscious and dehydrated. Number. ID, no phone, just a note in my pocket. I asked to see it. She hesitated, then handed it to me. A scrap of paper, yellowed and stained. 5 words written in deep red ink. I am the window now. That was 2 weeks ago. They've been evaluating me for dissociative episodes. I overheard a doctor say it might be schizophrenia, trauma-induced hallucinations, sleep deprivation. I nodded, smiled. Told them I was feeling better. They seemed relieved, said I might be released soon, but I won't leave. Because now I understand he's not in the window, he is the window, and every time I look into glass, a mirror, Phone screen, a TV. I see him watching me from the other side. And last night, I caught myself waving back. I was discharged the next morning. The hospital staff handed me a paper bag with my clothes, a bottle of mild antipsychotics, and a generic pamphlet about reintegrating into everyday life after a delusional episode. They smiled too hard like they didn't believe a word. I'd said, but were too polite to call me crazy. I didn't blame them, because I'd stopped trying to convince anyone. The truth had burned itself into my bones. They thought I was getting better, but I wasn't getting better. I was getting closer. I moved into a tiny rental, far from the city. No mirrors, no TV, no reflective surfaces of any kind. The windows were boarded up from the inside. My phone was gone, smashed beneath my own boot heel weeks ago. Every night I sat in the center of the room with a single candle lit. That was it. My whole routine. Breathe. Stay still. Don't let him in. But it didn't matter. The man in the red suit no longer needed a window to watch me. Because I had become one, it started with small things. I'd see flashes of red in the puddles outside during a rainstorm when there was no one there. I heard faint whispers in the static between radio stations. Then one night while brushing my teeth, I caught sight of something in the blank wall above the sink. There was no mirror, but the white paint shimmered like a film of water, and for a moment, I saw him, grinning. Not through glass this time, through me. I haven't slept in 4 days. Every time I close my eyes, I wake up somewhere else. Sometimes, in places I know, sometimes in your house, looking out from inside your reflection. I try to fight it, try to stay myself. But something about him is sinking deeper, like ink in water, spreading through me. Last night, I bit through my lower lip just to stay grounded. I needed the pain, the bleeding, the proof that I still had control. But when I looked at the blood, it ran backward, like time rewinding or reality melting. Tonight is different. The air feels too still. The candle won't light no matter how many matches I strike. And my boarded windows, they're rattling, not from wind, not from anything outside, but from within. The voice is back now, stronger than ever. It fills my head like a radio turned up too loud. You're ready. You've been ready for a long time. Let me show you the truth. I clench my fists, but my fingers twitch on their own. I can't tell if I'm resisting or reaching. Then I see it across the room, a mirror, where there wasn't one before. It's tall and framed in black, leaning against the far wall like it's always been there. Dustless, immaculate, waiting. I scream and back away, but my legs don't listen. My body moves forward in slow, trembling steps. I want to look away. I try. But my head tilts up on its own. And there he is. The man in the red suit, but he's no longer behind the glass. He's inside me. My reflection smiles. And I feel my own face stretch into the same grin. You are the window now. I black out. When I come to, the mirror is gone. I'm lying on the floor. My skin feels too tight, like it's being worn, rather than lived in. The boards on the windows have been pried off from the inside. My hands are covered in splinters, but I didn't do it. He did. Now I roam not because I'm looking for safety, but because he is, and I'm just the frame he wears. Some nights I'll find myself outside someone's house. A stranger. A family. A child's bedroom window. And I'll be standing there in a red suit, waiting, watching, letting them see just enough. Because that's how it starts, isn't it? One glance. One crack in the curtain. And then I'm in. So if you're reading this, if you're sitting near a window or looking into a dark screen and wondering if what you saw flickered behind, it was just a trick of the light. It wasn't. You've already looked too long. And now he's in. Your reflection too, not waving, not smiling, waiting. Because once you see him, he sees you forever.